Seth Curry kept a childhood secret for more than 20 years. During a family reunion, he finally revealed something to Steph that left him deeply moved. The NBA star's reaction was immediate. Tears he couldn't contain. What was this secret that changed everything between the two brothers? The smell of grilled meat hung in the humid Charlotte air while Del Curry adjusted the temperature of the barbecue grill, the same model he had been using for more than 20 years. It was a Saturday in February 2024, during All-Star Weekend, and for the first time in months, the entire Curry family managed to gather at the house where it all began. The residence on Ardsley Road seemed smaller now, with Steph at 36 years old and Seth at 34. But it still carried every memory of a childhood built between basketball courts and impossible dreams. "Dad, are you still using that homemade barbecue sauce?" Steph asked, carrying Riley on his shoulders while Cannon ran after a ball in the backyard. The grass was a little yellowed by North Carolina's mild winter, but the afternoon sun created a welcoming atmosphere that made anyone forget about the NBA spotlight. "Of course, son. Your grandmother's recipe doesn't change," Del responded with a smile, turning the ribs with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times. Sonia appeared at the back door, carrying a tray with grilled corn, and that cornbread that always disappeared first at family gatherings. Seth was quiet, sitting on the back porch, observing the scene with a contemplative expression that Steph couldn't decipher. During the last few months, since he had retired from the NBA, Seth seemed to carry something on his shoulders, an invisible weight that manifested in moments like this, when he should have been relaxed. "Seth, are you okay? You seem like you're on another planet," Steph approached, lowering Riley to the ground so she could play with her cousins. "Actually, Steph, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept for a long time," Seth said, his hands nervously adjusting the Warriors cap he was wearing. An irony, considering that Steph was the one who played for the San Francisco team. The family continued their normal activities in the background, but Steph felt a change in the atmosphere. He knew Seth better than anyone in the world, and that tone of voice indicated that something important was coming. "What's wrong, man? You're scaring me." Steph sat down next to his brother on the wooden bench that Del had built when they were children. Seth took a deep breath, looking at his own hands before meeting his brother's eyes. "Do you remember when you were 8 years old and tried to join the Charlotte Hornets juniors team? That weekend team that Coach Miller ran?" Steph frowned, searching through memories. "Vaguely. Why?" "It was a long time ago, Seth." "Do you remember being rejected?" The question hit Steph like a punch to the stomach. For a moment, he was silent, and then the memories began to return like waves. The cold YMCA gymnasium, the smell of burnt rubber from sneakers on the waxed floor, and mainly Coach Miller's words echoing in his young mind. "Kid, you're too small and too weak for this level. Maybe try soccer." "Seth, why are you bringing this up now?" "Because I saw you that night. I saw what you did when you got home." Steph felt his heart race. "What are you talking about?" "You went down to the basement. I thought you were just going to practice a little, like you always did. But when I went down to get water, I saw you crying. You were there, alone, shooting ball after ball at the little basket that Dad installed, and whispering to yourself that you were going to prove the coach wrong. You said you were going to prove it, even if it was the last thing you did in your life." Steph's world stopped. The family voices in the background became a distant murmur. He vaguely remembered, that night, the frustration, the anger, but didn't know he had been seen in his most vulnerable moment. You were there. I was 6 years old, Steph. I didn't completely understand what was happening, but I knew you were hurt in a way I had never seen before. And I knew you wouldn't like someone to see you like that. The Curry family house was silent that Tuesday night. Del was still at the office, finalizing some contracts for his sports consulting company, while Sonia prepared. Chicken soup in the kitchen, the steam fogging the windows that faced the backyard covered with thin snow. Steph had arrived from the YMCA an hour ago, gone straight up to the room he shared with Seth, and hadn't even come down for the afternoon snack. The test for the Charlotte Hornets juniors had been a complete disaster. Steph had arrived at the gymnasium wearing the uniform washed by his mother, new sneakers that Del had bought especially for the occasion, and a heart full of expectation. At 8 years old, he already spent hours watching NBA games with his father, memorizing every movement, every play, dreaming of one day wearing a professional team's jersey. But Coach Bob Miller had other ideas. A tall and authoritarian man, former college player who took youth basketball more seriously than some colleges. Miller had observed Steph for only 15 minutes before making his decision. "Hey, blonde kid!" Miller had shouted from the other side of the court. "What's your name?" "Steph Curry, sir." "Well, Steph, you have a good shot for your age, but frankly, you're too small and too weak for this level. This team is for boys who want to compete seriously. Maybe you should try soccer or baseball. Basketball might not be your thing." The words cut Steph like a knife. He had trained for months, waking up early to practice shots in the backyard, asking Del to teach him new moves, dreaming of the day he could finally play on a real team. And now, in 15 minutes, it was all over. The 8-year-old boy left the gymnasium with red cheeks, not from cold, but from humiliation. During the entire ride home in the back seat of Sonia's car, he remained silent, looking through the window at Charlotte's houses passing in a blur. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Sonia had asked, looking in the rearview mirror. "It was good, Mom. Just tiring." Lie. The first of many that Steph would tell to protect his feelings from the family's compassionate looks. Now, at 7 o'clock at West night, Steph finally went down the stairs toward the basement. The house was typical of the 80s, with a finished basement where Del had created a small recreation space, an old TV, a worn sofa, and in the corner, the basketball hoop he had installed when Steph showed interest in the sport. The basement was cold and poorly lit. Only one fluorescent lamp provided enough light to see the basket. Steph picked up the official ball that Del had given him as a Christmas present, an orange, Spalding that still smelled like new leather, and began to dribble. First, they were just simple shots. Hit, get the ball, return to the line. But as the minutes passed, frustration began to overflow. The shots became stronger, more desperate. And then, the tears came. "I'm going to prove he's wrong," Steph whispered to himself, wiping his nose with his shirt sleeve. "I'm going to show everyone that he's wrong." What Steph didn't know was that Seth had quietly gone downstairs to get a glass of water in the kitchen and had stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he heard the sound of the ball hitting the floor. At 6 years old, Seth still didn't completely understand the complexities of rejection or ambition, but he understood pain, and his older brother, his hero, was clearly suffering. Seth stood there for almost 20 minutes, watching Steph practice through tears, hearing him repeat the same words of determination like a mantra. That night, something changed in Seth's heart too. He decided he never wanted to see Steph that way again, and if that meant he himself needed to become stronger to protect his brother from future disappointments, then that's what he would do. "I never told you because I knew you would be embarrassed," Seth said, his voice bringing Steph back to the present. You were always proud, even as a child. But that night, man, that night transformed you. I saw you train with an intensity I had never seen before, and it inspired me too. Steph was processing all of this, each word revealing layers of memories he had buried deeply. Seth, I didn't know you had seen. And it was better that way. Because if I had spoken at that time, maybe you would have stopped training alone. And it was in those alone moments that you became who you are today. The Curry family backyard had become a sanctuary of memories that afternoon. Dell continued at the grill, now preparing the sausages they always served as an appetizer, while Sonia organized the plates on the picnic table. The children played on the grass, their laughter creating a perfect soundtrack for the most honest moment Steph and Seth had shared in decades. Steph wiped his eyes discreetly, trying to process the weight of Seth's revelation. 28 years. For 28 years, his younger brother had carried that memory, protecting a secret that not even Steph remembered completely until a few minutes ago. "Man, I don't even know what to say," Steph murmured, looking at his own hands. The same hands that, at 8 years old, had held a basketball wet with tears in a cold basement. "You don't need to say anything. But there are more things, Steph. That wasn't the only time." Steph quickly lifted his head. "What do you mean?" Seth shifted position on the bench, clearly nervous, but determined to continue. "Do you remember the winter of 1998? You were 10 years old. I was 8. You had been cut from the school team again, this time because the coach said you didn't have the body of a basketball player." The memories came back like an avalanche. Steph vaguely remembered that period, a particularly difficult phase where it seemed like every door closed in his face. He was shorter than most boys his age, thinner, and coaches constantly questioned whether he had the right type of body for competitive basketball. That winter, you created a routine. Every night, after dinner, you went down to the basement with the excuse of doing homework. But I knew you were training. For hours, man. I heard the sound of the ball hitting the floor, the shots, you talking to yourself. "You were spying on me?" Steph asked, but without irritation. There was something almost touching about the idea that Seth was secretly watching him. "I wasn't spying. Just worried and inspired. One night, I went down to see if you were okay. It was almost midnight, and you were still there. You had created a complete routine. 10 free throw shots, 23 pointers, dribbling with your eyes closed. And you were whispering to yourself, 'They'll see. One day, they'll see.'" Steph felt a lump in his throat. He remembered those nighttime training sessions, but always thought they were secret, that no one knew about the almost obsessive intensity with which he dedicated himself to basketball during those formative years. "Seth, why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you keep all this?" "Because I realized something on those nights, Steph. I realized you weren't just trying to improve at basketball. You were trying to prove something to yourself. And if I interfered, if I let you know someone was watching, maybe you would stop doing what made you, you." Seth paused, looking at the basketball hoop that was still hanging in the garage, a newer version of the one Dell had installed decades ago. "And there's one more thing. The summer before your first year in high school, when you finally got on the Charlotte Christian school team, I saw you cry again. But this time, it wasn't from sadness." "What do you mean?" "You had just come back from the first practice with Coach Sean Brown. You went down to the basement as always, but this time you were smiling. You picked up the ball, made a perfect shot, and said out loud, "Thank you for never giving up on me." And then you started crying. But they were different tears. Tears of relief. Steph couldn't hold back anymore. Tears began to stream down his face as he relived not only his own memories, but now also saw them through Seth's eyes, a boy who had grown up secretly observing his older brother's determination, absorbing every lesson of perseverance without ever saying a word. Man, you kept all this to yourself for all these years? It wasn't difficult. It was inspiring. Steph, you have no idea how many times, when I myself faced rejections or difficult moments in my career, I remembered those nights in the basement. I remembered how you never gave up, even when no one believed in you. That gave me strength to continue too. Steph looked at Seth with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. His younger brother hadn't just witnessed his most vulnerable moments, he had become a silent protector of those moments, transforming them into fuel for his own journey. Seth, I always thought I needed to be strong for you, that I needed to be the example. But you were my example all along, without me even knowing. No, man, you were always my hero, even, especially, in those moments when you thought you were being weak, you were being the strongest person I knew. Steph stood up and hugged Seth, a long and tight embrace that carried decades of mutual and unexpressed admiration. In the background of the yard, Dell looked toward his sons and smiled, not knowing exactly what was happening, but recognizing a special moment when he saw one. "Thank you for keeping my secrets," Steph whispered in Seth's ear. "Thank you for giving me a reason to never give up," Seth replied. Dinner had ended more than an hour ago, but Steph and Seth still weren't ready to join the rest of the family in the living room. Instead, they decided to walk through the neighborhood where they grew up, a tradition they maintained whenever they gathered in Charlotte, but which this time carried a completely different meaning. Ardsley Road was quiet under the streetlight glow, with the familiar houses seeming smaller than their childhood memories suggested. They passed the Johnson house, where they used to ask for their ball back when they accidentally kicked it over the fence, and the Mitchell residence, whose backyard had served as an informal extension of their own basketball court during summers. "Do you remember Mrs. Peterson?" Seth asked, pointing to a light blue house with a meticulously maintained garden. "Of course. She always yelled at us when we made too much noise playing ball in the street." "Well, she stopped me last week, when I visited Dad and Mom. She said she always knew you two would go far in basketball. Apparently, she used to watch you guys train from her kitchen window." Steph laughed. "Really? And I thought she hated us." "I think half the neighborhood was watching us grow up. Makes you think about how many stories people kept about us that we'll never know." They reached Ardsley Elementary School, where they had studied together for a few years. The outdoor court was empty, but the baskets were still there, a little rusty, but functional. Without planning it, both walked toward the baskets. "Do you remember the first time you managed to hit a three-point shot on this court?" Seth asked, touching the basket post. "I was about 9 years old. You got more excited than I did." "Because I knew what that meant to you. After so many attempts, so many frustrations, seeing you finally succeed was like watching a miracle." Steph picked up a small stone from the ground and threw it toward the basket, imitating a shot. "Seth, about what you told me today. This changes everything." "How so?" "During all these years, I always felt I needed to be the perfect older brother, the example, the strong one. I kept so many insecurities, so many fears, because I thought you needed to see in me someone who never doubted, who never failed." Seth leaned against the basket post, looking at Steph with a gentle expression. Steph, if you knew how many times I held myself together in difficult moments because I remembered your strength in even more difficult moments. Man, your vulnerabilities taught me more about perseverance than all your victories combined. How so? Because anyone can be strong when they're winning. But you showed me how to be strong when everyone says you won't make it. When you're alone in a cold basement, crying, but still not giving up. That's true strength. They continued walking, passing the convenience store where they used to buy basketball cards with their allowance, and the barber shop where Dell took them every month. Every corner carried a memory, but now these memories had a new dimension. Seth's perspective, who had been a silent witness to moments Steph thought he had lived alone. There's something I want to ask you, Steph said when they reached the small park where they used to play when the school court was occupied. Sure. Did you ever feel pressured for having a brother in the NBA? Like you had to live in my shadow? Seth laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the empty park. Steph, do you think someone who grew up watching you cry from frustration in a basement could feel intimidated by your success? Man, I saw you build all this from scratch. I saw you at your worst moments and your best. For me, you were never Steph Curry from the NBA. You were always Steph, my older brother who never gave up. But what about when people make comparisons? When they ask why you didn't reach the same level? They don't understand that getting where I got was already an incredible victory. And you know why? Because I had an example of how to never give up. You gave me the formula, man. Hard work, humility, persistence. The final result is less important than the process. They sat on the park swings, metal structures that creaked softly with the weight of two adult men, but still supported them as they had done decades ago. Seth, thank you. For what? For keeping those moments. For protecting me when I didn't even know I needed protection. And mainly, for transforming my moments of weakness into your strength. Don't thank me for that, Steph. Thank me for finally having the courage to tell you. I kept this for so long that sometimes I thought I would explode. Steph laughed, wiping the last traces of tears from his eyes. Well, now that you've broken the silence protocol, you can tell me all the other embarrassing secrets from my childhood. Oh man, you really don't want to know that, Seth said with a mischievous smile. I'm starting to get worried. Relax. This was the only one that really mattered. The rest are just funny stories I'll use to embarrass you at family dinners for the next 20 years. They laughed together, a sound that carried decades of complicity, now enriched by an honesty they had never shared before. The walk back home was made in comfortable silence, each processing how a simple revelation had forever changed the way they saw their relationship. When they arrived back at Ardsley Road, they could see through the living room window the family gathered watching a basketball game on TV. Dell was in his favorite armchair, Sonia on the sofa with her granddaughters on her lap, and everyone seemed completely unaware of the transformative moment that had happened between the two sons. Ready to go back to the real world? Seth asked, standing on the sidewalk in front of the house. Ready, but with a completely different perspective. Good, because now that you know I was always watching, I can finally stop pretending I don't care about your missed shots in games. Steph laughed and put his arm over Seth's shoulder as they walked toward the front door. And I can stop pretending to be the older brother who has everything under control all the time. Deal. Deal. The front door opened before they even arrived, with Sonia appearing with a worried smile. You two disappeared. We were starting to worry. Just talking, Mom. Catching up, Steph said, kissing her cheek. Good. Because a Lakers game just started, and you know your father will want your opinion on everything. As they entered the warm house, Steph looked one last time at Seth, his younger brother, who for decades had been his silent protector, his secret spectator, his unrecognized inspiration, and now, finally, could simply be his brother. Without secrets, without unnecessary protections, just with the mutual love and admiration that had always existed, but could, now, be expressed openly. Outside, Charlotte's night settled peacefully over Ardsley Road, silent witness to another chapter in the story of two brothers who learned that true strength doesn't come from hiding our vulnerabilities, but from finding people who transform them into a bridge to our greatness.